please just contribute to the conversation. I know a lot of you have a lot of things to say about this topic, so please feel free to raise your hands if you have any comments throughout the conversation. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome to the Tharawat space. My name is Farida Al-Agami. I'm the general manager of the Tharawat Family Business Forum, which is the organization that you see over there. This is our space. It's a space that we use to promote multi-generational entrepreneurship and conversations around business ownership and the development of kind of conscious business practices in our city, in our country, here in the UAE and in the further region. So what we wanted to do today with today's session is really have an interactive conversation, and I have to say I'm really happy with this panel. It's kind of a dream panel. These three incredible people have honestly, I've had conversations with all three of them separately on very different topics, and I'm very excited to see how we're going to have a conversation all together here. I'll start by just quickly introducing them, and then I'll just give you the floor to briefly introduce yourselves and kind of give a twist on why you're here and why the subject is important to you. I'll start with gentlemen first, because that's what we do when we're in the majority, because exactly. So Dr. Noah Raford, welcome, COO of Dubai Future Foundation. We have Najla Midfa, General Manager of Sheraa, and also one of the partners of today. So we'd like to thank Sheraa for the support and the sharing of the conversation. And Priyanka Zielinsky. Priyanka is the Executive Director of MPIL Steel Structures, both in India and here in the UAE. So maybe I'll start with Noah. See, I'm very egalitarian today. Maybe I'll start off with you, Noah, just to introduce yourself and maybe also give us a bit of what is the link, between you and the topic of today.
Great. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Welcome. Thanks everyone for coming tonight. Thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be with you. So very briefly, the Dubai Future Foundation is a Government of Dubai agency, and our job is to help look across different sectors and a little bit longer on the horizon to understand how emerging technologies, emerging business models are changing the way that we work and live, with the goal of trying to pick the best parts of that and accelerate the transformation of the 21st century in Dubai and make the UAE a test bed for these kinds of ideas. So obviously technology has been fundamental to the growth of the Industrial Revolution, to everything that we enjoy today. The very idea of the weekend, something which was alien to farmers originally. You just got up, you farmed, you worked, and then you had your harvest. And so technology is changing the way that we do our jobs now. I mean, I don't know if, does anyone here work in a factory? Is anyone here a farmer? So we're quite distinct from 99.9999999% of all humans ever. So we're living in a world which is already transformed by technology, and the forces of production and the forces of information creation and sharing are transforming the way that we do our jobs and the way that we create value and share that with each other at an increasing rate when we start to talk about automation and AI and robotics. Traditionally, that's just been confined to industrial spaces, so robotics for industrial uses. But as we start to think about artificial intelligence as a software tool which can help, anything that you do repeatedly is becoming able to be done by machines and software, then you can imagine the portions of your day which are more or less repeatable. Anything you can teach to a colleague, a machine will be able to do in the not so distant future. That will fundamentally transform the nature of work. And then as a government agency, what does that mean for providing prosperity and well-being for your citizens and for your residents?
Yeah.
So that's why this issue is quite close to our heart, because we think it will fundamentally rearrange the relationship between government and society, government and industry, industry and society, in an unprecedented way.
Yeah, thank you. Najla.
Thank you, and thank you once again. It's a pleasure to partner with Tharawat and to be with part of this amazing panel. Just to tell you a little bit about Sheraa. So Sheraa, or also known as Sharjah Entrepreneurship Center, was set up fairly recently in 2016 as a platform to help students and graduates studying in Sharjah to set up their own businesses. So obviously the topic of the future of work and the future of employment is important to us from two perspectives. One, everybody knows there's a skills gap between what the students are learning in university and what is actually required in today's 21st century world. So we see part of our role is giving these students and these graduates the 21st century skills that they need to succeed and to thrive in today's economy. The other part is creating innovative, sustainable, scalable businesses and startups that are away from the more traditional businesses that a lot of them think about, more sort of the mom and pop shop style, and getting them more towards thinking about AI, for example, startups and so on. So obviously, yes, the future of work is an important topic, and it's something that I look forward to discussing today.
Great. Priyanka?
Good evening. My name is Priyanka Zielinsky, and for the last 10 years, I've been working in our family business, which is MPIL Steel Structures Limited. And I'm speaking at the confluence of two forces. One is being part of a family business, the second generation family business, where we have challenges that are unique to us in terms of how we accept and deal in terms of how we accept and react to change. And the other part of the confluence is belonging to a very traditional industry, which is steel manufacturing, factory-based, labor-intensive. And that industry in itself is very parochial and very slow to bring about change because it's so capital-intensive that even minute developments in technology affect us dramatically. We use a lot, very labor-intensive industry. We have a large amount of skilled, unskilled labor, and we are very deeply affected by these topics. So that's why I'm here today.
So I think maybe now you can see why I'm specifically excited to have three such, first of all, well-spoken people on the panel, but also three people who come at the topic from slightly different perspectives. So someone who employs large numbers of people, someone who tries to also drive government policy towards a certain goal of common good, as well as someone who's trying to help the next generation to act and be active in that economy of the future. So this is really kind of the approaches that we want to take to tackle this topic. Before we actually start with the conversation, I wanted to share a couple of content points with you that we are all kind of on the same basis, or that we depart from the same basis. We keep talking about this fourth industrial revolution, and I know there's a lot of debate about who started this conversation. My research has shown that it was actually a German government paper in around 2006 or 7 who first mentioned the idea of Industry 4.0, and who said, you know what, the way we're going in a very German manner, probably very analytical, said, we have to talk about where the German very manufacturing heavy, very SME heavy industry or economy is going in this context of the economy of the future. So obviously then it has been picked up, it has been used a lot in recent days. I think there's hardly, Noah, you can maybe agree with me or disagree with me, but there's hardly a panel on future economic trends that doesn't mention this fourth industrial revolution. But I thought in order to have kind of a common perspective of it, I cut this out from a video that Siemens made about their new technologies, and I thought it was quite an interesting summary of the four industrial revolutions, and it will help us kind of get our conversation forward. It's okay, it's not so bad.
A look back at history. At the end of the 18th century, the first steam engines and the intelligent use of hydropower revolutionized production. The late 19th century saw the rise of electrical engineering and mass production. The first moving belt conveyor was used as long ago as 1870 in the slaughterhouses of Cincinnati, Ohio. In the mid-1970s, electronics and IT began to expand rapidly into industry. Siemens developed the first Simatic. Production became increasingly based on computer-assisted controls. The fourth industrial revolution is still a vision. Experts believe that it will only become a reality within the next 20 years. In intelligent factories, everything is interconnected wirelessly.
So obviously a little bit of product placement there, but I thought it was a very good summary of these four industrial revolutions that we had, and that now people are starting to almost predict, because obviously the previous industrial revolutions were were always kind of post-fact. We looked at them and we said, oh wow, this was a point of revolutionizing the industry. And today we're actually almost predicting it. So I thought that was an interesting shift. Now, in order to move into our conversation, I wanted to start by polarizing the conversation a little bit. There's two perspectives that people seem to take when it comes to the future of jobs. The first one is someone that probably doesn't need introduction, Elon Musk. There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better. I want to be clear, these are not things I wish will happen. These are things I think probably will happen. I think we'll end up doing universal basic income. It's going to be necessary. This is something that he also said at the Dubai Government Summit, I think last year. And it kind of had a ripple effect as well in the conversation. So he clearly is someone who is slightly pessimistic, I would say, or maybe very pessimistic, about the future or the impact of technology on the future of the workforce. Now, the other side of the coin is someone who is from a very different school of thought. Ray Kurzweil, he's a futurist and one of the founders of the Singularity University, and he was talking about how he would have predicted. So if someone had spoken to him in the 1930s about kind of the mechanization of certain industries, he would have said the following. He said, everybody would have said to him, oh my God, we're going to be out of work. And he would have said, well, don't worry, for every job we eliminate, we're going to create more jobs at the top of the skill ladder. And people would say, what new jobs? And I would say, well, I don't know, we haven't invented them yet. And this is also his approach to today's situation. So he is clearly of the opinion that basically don't worry, be happy. It's kind of a reggae approach to the whole situation, in my opinion. And I think it's an interesting starting point to the conversation. And maybe Najla, would you like to react to this and to the question, you know, is this a hype? Is the question of the future of jobs something that we shouldn't even bother with?
So I kind of fall in between, I suppose. I generally agree with Ray Kurzweil, saying that yes, technology has always changed the nature of jobs, and I think that's what it's going to do this time around as well. I don't think it'll necessarily eliminate entire jobs, except in a few categories, but it will eliminate certainly a lot of tasks. So we will see a big shift. I think we're already seeing it, shift towards the gig economy, for example. People, we're asking for more flexible work-life, shorter-term contracts, and so on. So I think definitely the nature of the jobs will change. And I think, again, this goes back to what I was saying, that it's easy to say, yes, jobs will change, and therefore we will just create new jobs. The thing is, are the people skilled enough to take on those new jobs? And are we doing enough to give them the right problem-solving skills and the creativity skills and so on? And often when I say that, we're teaching entrepreneurship, people assume that, okay, you're teaching them to start a business. But that's not necessarily just it. Yes, partly some of them go on to start businesses, but for the most part, entrepreneurial skills are exactly what they will need in the future. So even if they don't start their startup, through the process, they're learning about problem solving, they're learning about critical thinking, all the missing skills and all the important skills that will be important as we get into this fourth industrial revolution. Having said that, with what Elon Musk is saying about universal basic income, I think that's true as well. I think we do need to reconsider safety nets. As I said, the gig economy is a great thing, but it also means there are no guarantees anymore.
Yes.
We're not in those days of our parents' days and our grandparents' days where they joined one corporate and they stayed there for 30, 40 years, and it was a stable job and you went from 8 to 5 and things were good and you were a middle-income family. It's just not going to be like that anymore. And I think solutions such as universal basic income can actually be something that's very helpful as we transition into the new
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Actually, just jumping off of what Najla just said, an industry like steel, we are going to be the bad guys because we are going to let go of so many people, and a lot of the negativity will come from us because all the shifts we will be the first ones to be doing it. We're so labor intensive and we have such large numbers. For example, we have everybody on our payroll right now. When we move forward in an industry which has been in such a long recession, we cannot afford payroll people anymore. It's always going to be project-based, delivery-based. So if the project is not live, your job is not live. Then are we also going to be responsible for that, creating that safety net? And family businesses traditionally have had the reputation and they've been sort of the responsible employers, and they've looked out for their people. So as a family business owner, second generation, people who've been with my father all their life, what is my responsibility as a second generation business owner to them? So there are lots of difficult questions that we will be having to deal with. Secondly, right now, in the current state of manufacturing, we are manufacturing in the factories using quite we're adopting well the machines and technology. But in the future, we're not going to be manufacturing in factories in India and shipping to Africa and shipping all over the world. If your project is in a town outside of, Addis in Ethiopia, we are going to be manufacturing right there. We're going to go there and we're going to set up our manufacturing there. It's going to be exactly customized for that project. Everything will be neat to install basis because 3D printing, we are already seeing that at the factory level with the part bricks we can print it. We don't have to wait for the supplier to send it from China, send it from Germany. So there'll also be a geographical shift of employment. Now I'm moving out of 20,000 people employed in my factory in India, I'm moving maybe 2,000 of those jobs to the factory in Finja, Ethiopia. So there'll also be a geographical shift. There's this, where we live, we see the world around us is very developed, but the rest of the world does not still look like it, especially when we're going for large infrastructure development. And there will be opportunity created in those patches, so there is definitely hope for them. I don't know what that means for the rest of the countries which are already developed.
But so from your personal perspective, would you position yourself?
We're splitting. We're on that side.
You're on that side. Okay. Well, that's very clear. I knew she's a very blunt person, so I just wanted to get that out of you.
I guess on the spectrum, I would consider myself a optimistic realist. I mean, I'm optimistic because I think history has shown that as technology enables us to do new and better things, we do new and better things with it, and that usually goes up the value chain and provides more opportunities for creative expression. But I'm also realistic in the sense if you just look at the last 18 years of economic growth in the West, you have these huge productivity increases, but flat job growth. So the jobs that are being created that have value and that provide for a living wage and high quality of life are fewer and fewer and fewer and harder and harder and harder to get. And what the impact that has is the people who don't have the skills or the access to those types of jobs get worse and worse and worse jobs, right? There's a downward pressure into what, I'm sort of pessimistic about the gig economy because the lived reality of most Uber drivers is pretty poor in most countries.
Yeah.
And if you're an Amazon warehouse stockist, your days are numbered and you have a risk computer that determines every single step you take and they continually optimize what you can do. I think that we'll see this increasing split between extremely creative, interesting, high-profile jobs of people teaching the machines or working with the machines, and those who are just subject to the machines or just completely cut out of the process. Which begs the question, which I'm really glad you brought up, well, who provides for the safety net, right?
Yeah.
What happens to the increasing proportion of humanity who doesn't have access to the labor market, and then all of the social respect and the ability to provide for yourself and your family that goes with? And that's where I think it's quite interesting that these conversations are going back to universal basic income, because literally 5 years ago, even if I would say universal basic income at a conference, people start throwing tomatoes and calling me a socialist, right? But now you have these super libertarian Silicon Valley gods saying, oh, we need UBI, which begs the question of, well, what's the role of, who's going to provide that UBI? What's the role of government in that? And I think these are the right questions to ask, because right now, it's happening now, and your examples are fantastic. And the steel industry was one of the first to be disrupted with mini mills and all these sorts of things. So it's not a hypothetical 20 years from now question. This is something which we have to struggle with now.
I was wondering when I was doing the research, we keep saying technology is going to change employment. Technology is everything. I mean, I actually have started not liking the word technology because I'm like, what really are we talking about, So maybe if I can just quickly go back to you, Noah, what is it about this technological revolution? Because as we've seen before, we've had 3 phases where people have really had to shift their behavior, and we've changed the way we work, we've changed the way we look at things. But today, Ray Kurzweil is saying that by 2029, basically the singularity moment is achieved, and the computer is going to have the exact same abilities as a human being. Now, that for me sounds very different from, you know, Henry Ford figuring out that if he puts people behind each other, they work more efficiently, right? So how can we understand that, you know, difference basically?
So, I mean, the key difference, if you look at robotics in the industrial workplace context, historically, you have to have somebody program every single move that they do. So they're very inflexible. The key difference that we're seeing now is machines, and take machines as a metaphor for software in general, right? Machines are learning to learn.
Yeah.
And when you have a self-learning system, a system which you give it a goal, or it has a goal, and it can experiment against that and figure out the best way to do that, you have this extraordinary explosion of potential, to the point now that we have deep learning algorithms and machines that, like Go, for example, the classic Google's company called DeepMind beat Go, which is like a super complex form of Asian chess. It's much more complicated and profound. Beat the world's best human being, making moves that no human being had ever even thought of, right? So you have machines doing things that not only are achieving better outcomes than the people, but doing it in a way which is fundamentally alien, because we just don't understand how they've taught themselves some bizarre little way to do it. And so I just think that it's that reflexivity. The machines are now learning to learn, and are able then to learn in ways using languages that we don't understand, that are much more profound than most human beings. And that's a key difference, because you have that reflexivity where things can learn to learn. And then at that point, then, as you start to apply that logic to higher and higher orders of thought, let's say function, at a certain point, these things are going to start to perhaps set or evaluate their goals, begin to operate or judge or question their role in society. I mean, their role in human interaction, and it becomes an entirely different ballgame. You know, the classic science fiction endgame of this is not only machines learn how to learn, they reproduce themselves, right? So you have self-replicating machines, and then it becomes, you know, a phenomenon of life that we are no longer in control of, right? So it's easy to get spooky in science fiction about that, but we really are in a world right now where things are fundamentally different, because machines can learn certain things now faster and better than humans, not everything, but increasingly anything that a person can learn, machines are learning to do. And I'll just bookmark this because I want to hand over, but this is increasingly true about the things which you traditionally consider to be exclusive to humans, so emotions, social engagement, creativity, affect.
Absolutely.
All these things, machines are making massive inroads in on a daily basis, with very interesting, potentially surprising consequences.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, just when you were talking, I remembered something. So basically, one of the programs we have at Sheraa is an accelerator program, and one of our accelerator graduates is in the audience, which is nice to see. But so we know I was in our first cohort, but we now just selected our second cohort. And it's really interesting because there's now, I don't know if you've heard of Angel, have you heard? So basically it's this, I guess, AI tool. The founder is Arab, but he's based in the US. So what we do is we get, you know, hundreds of applications, like you get for your cohort, of people wanting to be part of the accelerator, but we can only take 10. So how do we select the 10? We sit and then we go through the 300, then we shortlist to 50, then we shortlist to 20, then we ask them to come and pitch and so on. So this gentleman in the US, he said, you know what, if you literally just give me the name of the startup and the name of the founder, I don't need any other information, just give me the name of the startup and the name of the founder, I will tell you which are the best 10 startups based on whatever algorithm. I don't know what the algorithm is, and I don't know what the data points that he's looking at are. But he has kind of, you know, done it for previous startups that have already been successful and shown that it's a 90+ success rate. So he said, just give me the names, give me the startups, and I'll tell you which are the top 10 that are likely to grow and succeed. So it's interesting, that was part of my job, and now it's all actually being automated and can be done in no time. So it's the speed at which, it's actually, that's what, the scary part is the speed at which, yes, technology has always been changing, and yes, there's been steam and water and electricity, but it's you know, I guess Moore's law, the speed and the power and the processing power nowadays is like literally, it's unbelievable. You know, just what was possible 2 years ago versus what's possible today has changed so much.
Absolutely.
So I think that's something to keep in mind.
I fully agree, and I think what I find very, very interesting is the shift also in the power of decision making. Because if we think about who ultimately still controls whatever the future is of economic actors? Because in the past, it was big business owners who you would consider as, these are the people that you would go and talk to if you wanted to influence policy or if you wanted to change something. Now, it sounds like the people that we now have to talk to is the people who are at the origin of a self-learning machine. So my question is, for you, coming from a traditional industry, whatever we call traditional, but from a traditional industry, as an employer, as a business person, how does this knowledge of this speed of change, how does that impact how you and your father take decisions? Can it impact it because it's such a big change, or do you see it in your industry? Does it have an influence of how people do business?
Absolutely, and it's both temporal and it's also spatial. Temporal because the speed at which we can learn and have access to information, and there is no exclusivity in terms of skill sets anymore. First, we would hire mechanical engineers who would do the load calculation of how much weight a steel beam can carry for this building. We'll have civil engineers who would then figure out how we would grout this onto the floor and do the cement work around it. Now there is free software information on the internet that will do all that for us. So somebody like my father, who needs to, who had a team of people who was advising him, actually can have access to a lot of quick answers himself. So in terms of decision making, in terms of our access to vocational information, it's transformed already. And I'm not saying that the mechanical engineer is out of a job, but the mechanical engineer's role will have to be now spatially altered, because he will have to be a mechanical engineer. He will have to have very good presentation skills to pitch his idea. He will have to be very cool as a person to be able to design a building that is smart, fun, a space which can do many different things and just be a factory space. So the shifts are in so many different. They're two-dimensional. Possibly in terms of emotional learning, it could be three-dimensional. And as business owners, we are constantly having to up our speed.
Yeah.
It's like both ways. We are having to push ourselves. We're being pushed by all the external forces, and definitely, it's altering the way business is done. It's altering the way we are interacting with our clients. In just a matter of 10 years, since the time I joined a business and I was designing factory spaces for our clients, and now I have, in the recent past, never designed a factory. It's all smart buildings. They all have solar mounted rooftops. Nobody's wasting their terrace space. All buildings have self-ventilating, self-lighting spaces. All buildings have multi-use spaces. So people are thinking already outside the box in terms of how to design, how to use, how to maximize. And it's all possible because of the technological shifts.
Right. I wanted to get back to you, Noah, for a quick moment. Talking about the role of the government, because we heard from Priyanka a little bit how these developments and how this know-how influences a business owner to have to take different decisions. Now, when we look at government, obviously the role is also a dual role. On the one hand, the government has to be at the forefront of innovation, has to push innovation, like this German paper that basically launched this whole conversation about the fourth industrial revolution. And then at the same time, you have this role of responsibility. So I wanted to show kind of these two aspects of government. On the one hand, where the UAE government has smart robots now that kind of provide government services. And then on the other hand, you have a call for responsible management of this technological change. So how do you see, because obviously the government is probably at kind of the top level of kind of overview and macro sight of the situation.
It's easy to get pretty deeply into political philosophy and very polarized opinions on what government should and shouldn't do, but at the high level, generally consider government's job to provide for the public good. And how you define that depends on very conservative, small state people who argue, okay, just give me a police force and just give me roads, right? Or just give me a police force, or just get out of my hair, right? On the other end, you have more, in the old days, traditionally centrally planned economies, where government not only provides for the military, the police, the healthcare, the education, the infrastructure, but also owns many major industries, provides job placement services and social welfare programs. Depending on where you sit on that, I think depends on how you address this question. I think here in the UAE, we're extremely lucky because government views itself as not just the protector of the public good, but includes in that definition the ability, the responsibility for the welfare of its people, economically as well as socially. So the idea that you have a government who's responsible for generating wealth, or at least providing the conditions that wealth generation can occur in, makes sense if you think about, okay, we have to be the ones who are going to test out the robots or test out the flying cars. And really, if you get down to it, there are very few other people who could do this, because the early stage technologies as they're emerging are extremely risky. There's one of my favorite economists is a woman named Mariana Mazzucato. She's a British economist, and she looks at the history of innovation, the role of governments, the role of government in stimulating innovation, and you find that all of the most important, most of the most important breakthroughs preceding each of these industrial revolutions were heavily state financed. The reason being, there hasn't been a market proven for them yet. You don't have to go back to the steam engine to see this. Just look at the iPhone. Every single technology in iPhone was a government-backed or government-sponsored research project, from the internet itself, to cellular technology, to touch screens, to lithium-ion batteries, to all of the components that Steve Jobs then later brought together into this consumer product were the result of government research and innovation. And it took then government to push forward to make a market for and make a space and support those really long-term bets, things for which no venture capitalist in the right mind would invest in because it was just way too early. It's like, there's no market for it yet. So it's government's fundamental job to stimulate that. At the same time, it's their fundamental job to try to understand the potential risks that are associated with that. So things like ethics committees and that like are usually associated with that. I think the UAE is, at the moment, probably unique in the world, certainly among the top 2 or 3 countries, that's able to balance that out quite well. There's extraordinary support for innovation, early stage innovation, that rapidly accelerates the transition from lab-based stuff to startup stuff to actual real commercial products that are produced at scale. But in doing so far in a fairly socially responsible framework. So that is the governance challenge of the 21st century, and it's going to become more difficult as this starts to hit jobs very hard.
Exactly.
And you start to have people traditionally, and this is a demographic question, right? You start to have your older members of society who hit retirement age and have literally no place in society anymore, or they're in their 30s and their job goes away. Then the question of reskilling and retraining becomes quite important, and this question of universal basic income becomes quite important. Because otherwise, it's very easy to get a population that is scared of the future, and against the future, and against the people that represent the future.
Which is specifically, obviously, I mean, that's very, very dangerous. And I mean, again, we're talking about the UAE, but I think we all have to be very conscious that we do live in a region where in some countries youth unemployment reaches almost 50%. So the worry that obviously we have to deal with, and I would say from a macro as well as from a micro perspective, is how will this impact, if this really goes forward at the speed that we think it goes forward, how will this impact the already existing unemployment and kind of lack of opportunity for young people? Najla, I wanted to ask you one thing. I mean, this is a chart made by the BBC that kind of shows you the probability of automation by occupation. So there's a bit of debate about this chart because they say, well, even managerial jobs and even kind of high-level jobs will be automized. I mean, I'm a lawyer by training, and there have been, the first cases have been tried by artificial intelligence, so I feel endangered. I do feel like an endangered animal a little bit, so it's weird. And even doctors, and obviously we all know that it goes really, really fast, even with jobs where you have a feeling of control, where you're like, you know what, I spent 8 years studying this, no way someone can replace me. But then obviously you go, in a different direction with regards to kind of manual labor, unskilled labor. Even I was surprised that sales and customer service, a very, very high percentage of that will be replaced, which obviously brings us also to the question of the retail sector being completely kind of restructured. I don't know if anyone follows the CEO of Najla Al-Futtaim Holdings. I can tell you, he posts pretty much every day something about the disruption of retail. So, even someone at the helm of a retail empire is aware, or has to be aware, obviously, of the changes. So what I wanted to ask you is, do you see, how will this impact young people who want to start a company or who want to be involved in a company, because also work obviously has more than just earning money. work is a self-fulfillment. It's a way to feel good about yourself. How do you see this impacting the future? And is this something that you would talk about with the young people that you work with?
I do. I mean, in fact, one of the things I do aside from Sheraa is also a non-profit that I run specifically to help the Emiratis get into the private sector, because that's a big issue over here. Obviously, we have only 20,000 Emiratis working in the private sector of over 4 million jobs. But again, the question is, so what kind of jobs in the private sector? And you know, what I've realized over time is it's not just about getting Emiratis into the private sector, it's about getting them into the right job in the private sector, right? There's no point if all the Emiratis are going to go there and become PROs, which is a job that's eventually going to become, for example,
absolutely,
you know, organized. Yeah. So it's about giving them the right skills. And in general, what I've found with the younger generation is actually that they're very excited to learn. One of the things that I say a lot about Sheraa, and I've seen it with so we have a very young team. I'm obviously the oldest on the team, and in general, most of them are in their 20s. I just walked in the other day when I was at Sheraa to the meeting room, and I saw that, you know, half the team was sitting around in a circle with their laptops. I said, what's going on? So they said, we're doing an IDEO course, human-centered design, online, and you do it as a group. So they're taking learning into their own hands. They're not waiting for someone in university to tell them, by the way, you know, we just remember that, hey, this is a great thing to study. They're actually, you know, at the forefront. At least the ones who are sort of more knowledgeable and more curious. It's about injecting that curiosity. I think that's the most important thing that will be, you know, that will get us through these technological transformations and revolutions, is that desire, that motivation, that desire to learn, the curiosity, and the ability to keep growing and learning. So I think that's one of the things that I noticed with the youth. I think they're very aware that a lot of the jobs are being changed and being taken over by technology, but they're not afraid of it. They just want to be engaged, and I think that's the part that's missing, because we're not engaging them enough. And I think platforms like Sheraa, like the Future accelerators and so on, give them that ability to engage with technology early on enough that it can actually positively impact their career.
I find that very interesting. By the way, if you have any comments, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. I know there are people in here who have things to say, so you know, don't make me come to you afterwards and be angry at you. But I find this very, very interesting what you're saying, because it means that we basically, because the time between the shifts of the kind of from the third industrial revolution, the time it was implemented, the time it had kind of fully kind of entered the workforce, probably was maybe around 20 years. The question is now, they were speaking about 20 years in the video, but I think we are feeling it today. We are seeing the shift today. So as individuals, my question also maybe to you, Priyanka, from an entrepreneurial perspective, but also just from an individual perspective, like what would you advise people to do, you know, with regards to what could happen to the companies that they work for potentially, or the companies they want to set up?
You know, as Najla mentioned, sometimes we can be very harsh on the millennials, especially me, because you know, they have a very different work ethic from what I'm used to. I'm very traditionally trained, but hats off to them. I mean, they have such a speed. They have so much speed in learning. They can incorporate so many different platforms, and they actually naturally are way more curious as a generation than we have ever seen. And with that curiosity, with that energy, they are going to create new needs for humans that we have never felt or wanted. And those new needs will then create new ways to satisfy those needs, whether it's services, products, you know, features, apps, whatever. And they will run this themselves. So, you know, the optimist in me feels that my son, my daughter's generation will be okay, because they will create an ecosystem that will, you know, take care of themselves. The education system will be totally different. Every time I put a little bit money aside for my son's college, I worry why I'm doing that, because he may not go to college at all. There may not be a 4-year college program for him, because he might be sitting in the living room with a laptop and headphones, learning whatever he needs to do specifically for what he wants to do, because his generation will recreate reality in the way we, at least the way we understand it.
Sure.
So I think the millennials deserve some credit, because they have already launched themselves, and they're going to take us to a place that we haven't seen yet. And that's why it's hard to imagine what we don't know.
It's a good point, but aren't they also, are basically the people who have been in employment for maybe past 10, 15 years, and are going to be active for the next 20, 30 years, aren't they the one who are absolutely in trouble? Because if you look at the young generation being educated according to the changes we see, obviously now the education system is going to look at this and say, oh, we need to focus on certain specific sectors. So is Elon Musk worried in the right way, but specifically for that segment of people who have finished their education and who are going to be in the workforce for the next couple of years? We have someone from the audience who has a question.
No, I was just very interested in what you said. I think that if I may answer.
Sorry.
Thank you. Safe from Innovation 360 Sweden. I think about the older generation that you mentioned. I believe a lot in MOOCs, massive free online courses. I see a tremendous number of people taking those courses. I myself are doing courses in machine learning through Coursera. It was, I think, the first application opened in 2016. A professor from Stanford is the world's leading AI scientist. I think 300,000 people signed up. So I believe that in the future, a lot of people will be able to go to these courses and refresh their knowledge. So I don't think there will be a shortage of knowledge in the future, but on the contrary, more competition among the workforce.
Absolutely. So what do we do with the people in the meantime? So what happens to these next couple of years of people in the workforce?
Raise your hand if you've ever worked in a job that you hated. Now, raise your hand if you ever worked in a job that you really, really loved. Or most of you, we're lucky. I mean, I think most people's experience of jobs is pretty boring because most jobs are really boring. And when we worry about the end of work, I mean, part of me says, bring it on. Good riddance, most jobs suck, And that's where robotics is sort of starting to end the dull, dangerous, dirty jobs. But that's going to, as that increasingly works its way through our society, that's a good thing in many respects, because I think the thing that, certainly in my personal and professional experience, makes me want to get up in the morning and try to create something new is the people that I'm working with and the opportunities to create something and try something new. And that's why I think the conversation around universal basic income is so important, because there's so much more to being a creative individual, a human being, a member of a community than just earning a wage. And if we can just strip that out of the equation, now this is a large, complicated debate about how to make that work and ways that it doesn't work, and etc. But if life doesn't become about jobs, life becomes about expressing what's interesting and purpose, exactly, very beautifully said. Then that's a world I want my kids to grow up in, right? A system that facilitates people to find and express and share their purpose with each other.
How many, sorry, just because you come from India, how many people you have in India? 1.2 billion.
Billion.
Yeah, million would be billion. Yeah,
Yes.
Billion. So
I wanted to actually jump off of what Noah said, because it's also going to play a very important role in the next generation. Because in our generation, we were still raised to have a career, have a plan, have a roadmap, own the homes, pay off the mortgage. So we are coming at the end of that. My son's generation may never own a home. He may not have the kind of expenses and lifestyle that we have come on with, because we are living in a shared economy. We don't need to buy a car anymore. Airbnb might go to a level where we may not even need to own a house anymore. So we're also talking about redefining lifestyle entirely in terms of what a boring job gives you a wage. Like that wage may not be needed, because your sense of purpose, your sense of fulfillment may come from zero ownership of anything. Studies say that millennials will spend their money on experiences, not on possessing things. Jewelry makers are already afraid that women in the next generation may not want diamonds and jewelry. That kind of that may not exist, and they may want to spend their money on different foods, different experiences, activities, and so a wage, a boring job, that hopefully will not exist, because people will want so much more from life and experience, and the purpose will drive that. That, like Noah said, good riddance, like that low-paying, boring job will not have a space.
So is there a scenario where this kind of science fiction vision of the world could become a reality, where you have a very highly skilled segment of society that, as you say, lives this kind of purpose-driven life, and then a huge gap and then a large number of people who have been left behind, in this development. And that's kind of one of my last questions I want to come to. That's why I asked about the number of people in India, because obviously it's easy for us to sit here, no judgment, but you're sitting here and you're having this conversation, whereas I would say the large majority of the community would not do that and would not have this conversation and would not even probably have access to this type of information. So, and just to finish the question, when we have the number of people, when you think strength in numbers, the question of physical violence, the question of challenging of statehood and of stability is obviously a question we have to talk about when we talk about, unemployment.
Absolutely. One of, if you look at one of the biggest risks that the fourth industrial revolution poses for us is very sharp inequality. It could really worsen. In some of the books that I've been reading, it also says even the gender gap might get worse. So we thought that in our generation, women are at work.
We can drive now.
Yeah, we can drive, and this panel has more women than a man. And look at how far we've come, and then maybe we'll go forward and it can become worse. So inequality could become worse, gender gap could become worse, and the world's stability in terms of peace and democracy, all of that could be destabilized when you leave behind such a large population and only a few of us have access to the skills and this new idea of what life will look like. How do we bring everybody on board? That's a question for Noah because he's in the government.
Good luck. We're not going to ask you to answer that. You can send us an email.
Yeah, I don't reply to emails. Emails are very
Sorry.
I think fundamentally that is government's job, and we often talk in the Future Foundation and senior UAE leadership about the role of a visionary state. It's a different perspective of states, and state not just as a manager or risk mitigator, but someone who has the moral authority by their position to be able to start to articulate in conversation an inspiring and hopeful vision about the future. A vision that gets young people and middle-aged people and elderly people excited and desiring to be a part of that future, as opposed to the traditional conversation around the future, which is one of anxiety and retreat. We don't have to, that science fiction scenario that you described is today. This is now. Many of my Indian friends describe Dubai. Did you guys see the movie Elysium? Anyone see that movie? Yeah. It's everybody, all the poor people live on Earth and all the rich people live on this fantastic post-scarcity space station. Some of my Indian friends are like, Dubai is the Elysium for India, right? Everyone who can afford to escapes come to Dubai. And in a larger sense, the UAE is the Elysium for the entire rest of the Gulf. And this is a common trope in literature. Everything from H.G. Wells' Time Machine to Ella Moorlie and these sorts of things. But that's our reality today, and we see what that violent expression looks like. This is what Daesh is about, right? A rejection of the future, a rejection of modernity. This is what Brexit was about, a rejection of brown people and foreigners. This is what Trump's campaign was about. It's about fictitious return to industry and some sort of ideal Americanism. And that's why I think it's so important that government in particular takes a strong, forceful view on this future, because our boss, the minister, always talks about we kind of have two futures ahead of ourselves for this region, but you could extrapolate that for the world. It's basically either Star Trek or Mad Max.
Yeah.
And that's the stakes that we're fighting for here. And government, there's probably no one other than government who can try to help to articulate that narrative and help us, guide us through that transition. And it's right that many people get angry at government for not playing that role. But it's not going to be a given that we end up in the world that we're looking for. And you just, again, have to look around here, not to overly dramatize, but many people ask, well, what does a post-scarcity future look like? Well, just look at Dubai, but instead of having robots, we have service workers. And many people treat service workers like robots. And so the darker side of what that looks like is already present here. There's a lot of lessons and inspiration for us just in our own daily lives about the way we spend our time and the way we derive our value, and the kind of society that we try to create on a day-to-day basis that can support or work against this aspirational vision of a better future.
Najla, one last track of thought. Just building on what Noah says, and I technically work in the government as well, and I find that we say this narrative that, okay, this is the purview of the government, it's their responsibility to, come up with, yes, absolutely, and we are lucky also to have a very visionary government that's, trying to stay ahead of this curve of innovation. But that doesn't mean that the private sector doesn't have a role to play.
Yeah.
And actually,
Yeah.
you know, if there's one thing that you can do for all your employees is give them the skills to prepare themselves for the future, where they will most likely not have the jobs that they have today. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. And and I also feel that, again, we're always kind of saying it's someone else's responsibility. It's our responsibility. Each person in this room can play a role in making sure that, you know, others don't find themselves in the situation where they are unable to live a dignified life, basically. So I don't want us to feel disempowered that we can't do anything about this. I feel like, again, that definitely platforms like, you know, DFA, like Sheraa, government-run platforms are great, but we also need the private sector to play a big part in this as well.
I'll just question from you.
So, just in conclusion, statistically, the number of people who are losing their jobs for machines, there's no plan. In conclusion, there's no plan. We don't have a fixed vision or plan or structure ahead saying these are the milestones, these are the strategies, so that the 5 workers who are working on the chain are now replaced by a robot, and 1 supervisor for the robot, maybe another guy, innovation, robotics, whatever. So 3 are out of the job, 2 are still there. And the population on Earth is increasing. So, you know, it's just going on opposite sides. And just to clarify, we don't have a plan, right? Is Doomsday's plan?
Well, I have a plan, but I don't know if people would like my plan.
What is it?
I'll email it to you.
Yeah, maybe the same perspective. My name is Rashid. I'm from telecom background. Telecom industry actually today is facing a lot of impact because of this digitalization and digital shift, and moving a lot of jobs which is purely used to be natural human element and interaction in the life cycle of digital communication to become some sort of lifestyle that we prefer, not dealing with a call center agent, but dealing with with a voice machine, or going to an online store instead of going to a physical store. So it's a culture thing. But my question now from government point of view, where, for example, Dr. Noah, most of the technology impressed today by the government, Najla as well. Recently, the Sharjah Foreign Investment was talking about the fourth industrial revolution. The government summit was also talking about the fourth digital revolution. Most of these topics are globalized topics where we're embracing technology, but most of those technology are imported from outside. From your perspective as working in the government and working from university point of view, where do you see the impact or the changes that need to be considered right now for the national workforces, the local people and the expats also living in the UAE or that are coming? We used to focus that the nationals, the people will work for the government, and the labor cost expats for the let's say low income jobs. So what are the metaphors or the formulas that we need to consider from now to at least ensure that we have the right ecosystem to embrace the technology, at the same time we have the right forces in the future to take over that journey as well?
I think that's a great question and a very relevant question. For me, one of the big things I see happening in Sharjah, and at least the government over there, they've spent a lot on education. So Sharjah University City, we have over 30,000 students studying over there. The kinds of degrees that are being offered are now much more different to what they were, years ago, where they were more traditional engineering and business degrees. So the degrees are changing, but also there's now a shift. Traditionally, these universities were teaching universities. They're now moving towards being research universities. And what you said earlier, a lot of these innovations have come out of a lot of government expenditure on research and being commercialized, eventually. And I think that's something that's really, if we have to be very honest in this room, we're not doing enough in terms of research. And even when I look at the startups that come to us at Sheraa, they're great ideas, but their market is like targeting Sharjah or maybe the UAE at best, and maybe, but they're not thinking about how can we build something over here that we can export to the world. And I think that mindset needs to change,
Absolutely.
And so that's something that we're working towards. We want to show them role models like Kareem that have built something from the UAE and have exported it to markets across the world, and I think that's what will really make an impact.
So does survival in tomorrow's job market, does it take more audacity by the individual? Like, do we have to be a bit more forceful and teach people to be a bit more kind of audacious about their roles and impact?
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is from one of the co-founders of Hyperloop. Question in the back. One does not walk meekly into the future. Right? You have to boldly. And this is what Sheikh Mohammed says this all the time. It's like the future belongs to those who boldly create radical change. And to sort of maybe perhaps synthesize your two questions, and I think if you take an example like Hyperloop, which is a company that came through a program we run called the Future Accelerators, they're here trying to do something which literally cannot be done anywhere else in the world because no government is willing to take those big bets as an experiment and say, we don't know if this works or not, but let's let it happen, right? Most of the investment for that is coming from private sources. All government has to do is just say, let's make sure this is happening in a safe way. Around that innovation, if you look at that as just a big experiment, I mean, a bet is just a hypothesis that you're willing to put a little bit of resources against. So the kind of role of government is to, at a high level, is to support these bets because industry, I mean, you have to sell steel, right? You have to make money. If you don't, people lose their jobs and you lose your company. So I think, while I deeply, profoundly agree with you that it's like we shouldn't look at government as a savior and private sector should always be doing this in partnership, we can't expect the private sector to build a Hyperloop without a government support because literally it's illegal, right? And most of the most important things in the world that we have to deal with are in these highly regulated spaces, which cannot happen without government support. In flying cars, genomic, personalized medicine, self-driving, whatever it is. So one answer to that is taking these bets. And if you take Hyperloop as an example, well, if I'm a young minority growing up here, do I want to go and support, go and work as a research analyst in a government department, or do I want to go hang out with these super cool people designing this really amazing new form of transportation that may or may not work, but at least it's exciting and you feel like a sense of purpose. So the ideal outcome, and this is an ideal perhaps, is that as government starts to take these bets, because nobody knows what the right answer is, maybe Hyperloop will fail and maybe something else, flying taxis will work, or whatever that is. But if we have an experimentalist approach to the future, then that's the only way we'll be able to get a sense for what goes forward, and that will also generate enthusiasm and excitement for young people to want to be involved in that and come up with their own ideas and get exposed to high-quality designers and engineers and going forward. That's at least our approach with it.
I'll allow 3 more questions. One already asked. Oh, wow. Okay. Now people are gonna. You should have acted earlier, guys. I told you a couple of times.
Hi, Najla here. So, Noah, you were talking about this, like how exciting it is, because now people can live their purpose, right? And we'll get rid of the boring jobs and people have the time to do that. And theoretically, like, I agree with you, that sounds great. But I'm also kind of wondering, what will be left? Because a big part of people's sense of purpose is their ability to contribute to society, even if it was just like growing a garden or doing some of these simple things. Two more thoughts that maybe you can comment on. They're just kind of things I'm curious about. The other thing is, it's kind of sad for me to think about the fact that we've created this technology to serve humanity, right? To help, to make our lives better, and yet the result of that is that people are now less relevant than the technology. Like, people have to fight to stay relevant when the technology is now more relevant than human beings, than life. And that to me is a tricky thing to think about. And then the last thing I'm thinking about, just to share, is I'm really genuinely curious about the moral responsibility that comes with these things. I mean, you were talking about automation of lawyers, right? And like,
it's very sad. Nobody wants to see lawyers go.
And I don't know about that one.
At least she's honest.
But I mean, there are so many moral questions that come with the automation of all of these things, and who bears that responsibility? And what do we do when something goes wrong, or when something goes wrong, and we've programmed these machines to be a certain way, or they're acting out of self-learned intelligence, and then who takes responsibility for that?
I'll give you a brief time to answer because we have another couple of questions, so I just want to get everybody.
Let's see if I can answer this next week.
Exactly, 140. 280 now, 280.
280 characters, okay. Let me measure my words. Let me just double down on the first part of your question, which is that traditionally we think about human beings being able to contribute uniquely to the creative act, the act of interpretation stuff, and we have machines that are generating music now, that are painting novel forms of painting, that are writing poetry, and that's going to get better and better, especially as they understand us. So I actually think there is a profound question around around who are we and what is life that we're going to have to grapple with.
That's the next Tharawat Talk.
And I'll just leave it there.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Taiba. I just finished my studies in Emirates Aviation University. I'm awaiting my graduation. So I have a very basic question that, now we mentioned about the population of India, and I'm an Indian. And, in this huge, large population of the world, how do we stand out? What is your secret of success? What would you suggest me right now? How to stand out, how to be different?
I'm going to hand this one over to the ladies.
That is for Najla.
I was going to say, I thought that you would say that you would send it to her in an email. So. I can only tell you what I tell our students at Sheraa at the American University of Sharjah, which I've said all along in this talk, which is always maintain a sense of curiosity. Even when we hire, we're looking at skills, but most importantly, we're looking at that desire to learn. So always have an open mind, build a lot of skills in different sectors, continue to keep yourself abreast of new developments and always challenge yourself to learn more. I think those are the things that will help you survive and differentiate yourself from others as well. So it's the soft skills. It's not any particular hard math, or I wouldn't even say coding. I wouldn't say go learn coding if you want to be relevant, because before you know it, coding will be irrelevant and automated as well. But it's the soft skill. It's who you are as a human being, which is exactly what Noah was saying, that will help you stand out.
One more question.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm just human being, not artificial.
That's okay.
I don't have any specific question, but I want to mention about the future of jobs. Like, what kind of future we are talking about? Is it a near future, or the mid future, or the other far future? Because we need to consider also this kind of things, and also plus region, and also we need to consider the population. Like, we are afraid of being unemployed or something, but we are not thinking about overpopulation of our countries. Also, I'm from Turkey. That's why we need to consider this kind of things, how we can prevent this kind of things, like billions of millions of people. We need to be scared of this, I think. Not the unemployment thing. And also there will be psychological effects and also biological effects of us. The mobile phones are extension of our hands, and we are gonna be like machines, not all of our body parts, but some of our body parts will going to be machine-based or machine-made. I think it's like inside we are all using it for art or somewhere else. And also, I think there will be some segmentation of people for the technology, early adopters of technology, and also followers of the technologies, and also non-adopters. And I think non-adopters will lose something, but they may gain something. Like, if they are thinking that nature is good and we are part of a nature and it's perfect to live, this is a psychological thing, they will gain for their lives. But if they want to live in a perfect world and they want to travel and they want to spend money, they will be a little bit unhappy about this, like non-adapting the technology because of non-adoption of everything. And I think the blurring between the nations will increase. But in addition to this, there is also limiting to the nations, like Trump and what Trump is doing, like what Brexit happens or something. Little bit scary, but I think we need to adapt to technology.
I basically think we just need a version 2 or a second season of this talk, because I think we have a lot more stuff to discuss. Thank you so much. I knew we should have just done an audience panel. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting thoughts.
Last question.
Okay, sure.
Okay, my name is Saeed. Okay, I'm from Circle Group. My question is that now currently we're talking about the basic automation and the threat that is causing for us as an employees, whatever. And there is another phase coming very soon, which is what is called the gig economy. which is going to be totally depending on independent employees having temporary jobs. For my point of view is that what is the role of the government and the private sector in contact, in between, is that they should at least secure a quota, meaning that not everything to be done by the machine. Because after she said before a colleague of here is that these machines or these automation were created to serve us, not for us to serve them or to be a slave for them.
Exactly. Thank you very much. And I'm actually going to use your question just to close or to end the session on this question that I'd like you to address is basically the question of how do we end up being in Elon Musk's scenario and we end up in the reggae version of the situation where we have at least opportunity. We will never have an ideal world, but we would have opportunity, equal opportunity for different people. So as a final word, who would like to start?
Private sector.
Okay.
So private sector definitely has a responsibility because we are such a large employer. And definitely, not just as private sector owners, but also because so many businesses around the world that are in the private sector are family businesses and we are true to our values, and that's why we're different from normal businesses. And family businesses are about taking care of people. And that's how I actually started my talk. Who's going to create the safety net? The private sector is going to play a big part in that. Private sector has driven changes and large-scale development in many developing countries. And so those kinds of ethics, those kinds of moral questions about people being served by machine, man over machine, are going to be at the core of all decision making. Will some people lose their jobs? Yes. We are also going to have to run businesses. We're going to have our cash flow. All of those problems we are going to have to deal with. But it's not going to be like I'm sitting here with my mobile phone in my pocket and my whole factory is AI and no human being is not going to get there. So, and it's because consciously we won't let it get there. So I think I just want to give a private sector plug here. Not going to be so bad.
Thank you. You said one word, and literally, if I had to say one word, it would be education. I think that's what's key to help us stay abreast of the changes that are coming. In terms of the new jobs that are being created, I see the skills that we are providing at places like Sheraa, DFA, and so on. That's our responsibility. That's why these platforms exist. The private sector also has a role to play, but the government has a role to play as well in the sense of the gentleman brought up the gig economy. And one of the things I think that needs to change is just the regulation around that. You don't want to use the gig economy to basically take advantage of people by paying them, below market salaries and having them work as long as you want. So I think also the government needs to change some of the regulation that needs to adapt to this fourth industrial revolution. I think all of us have a role to play. I don't think we can point to either the government or academia or the private sector to say one sole player's responsibility. Literally, each of us has a role to play. But overall, I'm very excited. I'm in Noah's camp. I'm definitely an optimist because these changes are coming whether we like it or not. So we might as well embrace it and make the most of what it has to offer. Thank you.
Okay, 2 or 3 things, very short, briefly. On the moral question, we did a project last December exploring this. Who controls the machines? Who defines what is right and wrong? Called The Moral Machine. So themoralmachine.ae, my colleague Jessica Bland in the back, raise your hand, Jess, yeah, did all the thinking around that. And it addresses this actual question. So you can go online to themoralmachine.ae and take a little morality test with it, and it'll, there's several implications that'll guide you through there. So that's an increasingly important question in the future, particularly as we get differential access to the means of programming, as it were, the sort of nouveau marx means of production. The second thing then is around the role of government. It is both to make these big bets and these big experiments and to do it responsibly. So just today, we launched a program with the DIFC courts called the Courts of the Future. So it's an international advisory board to help provide a forum for debating things like IP and what happens when the self-driving car crushes your dog and these sorts of things, right? Just an example, this is a trivialization of the trolley problem. And the last thing being, just to end on Najla's note of excitement, you guys live probably in the most exciting city in the world right now, where you have pretty much money just raining from the rooftops if you can inspire somebody with an exciting idea for it. And you have a government, unlike anywhere else in the world, who is just desperate for ideas that are going to make people's lives better and willing to test them out in huge and bold ways. So, take advantage of that, right? I mean, this is what the Future Accelerator is, one of our programs about. This is what the Future Foundation is about. This is what the Museum of the Future is about. This is what all of our work is around, is helping connect people like you with projects that might make a big difference in the world. So it's a great time to be in Dubai. It's a great time to be alive. And I encourage you all to get in touch with Najla to sort that out. But honestly, we look forward to it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really want to thank you because I know you're very, very busy people, and I know it's a topic that is kind of never ending. It's an open-ended conversation that we need to have. But thank you so much. I knew this was going to be very interesting. I'm very inspired. I feel I can actually do something. I don't know what yet, but I can actually do something. I'd like to encourage all of you, if you like these conversations, help us talk about relevant topics. So we have a whiteboard there. Please don't write on the wall, actually write on the whiteboard. And just share your ideas on what topics you want to discuss. What do you think we are missing in the conversation to take our steps to the next economy? You can follow us on social media for any further talks. And honestly, on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for your great contributions and insights.
It's good, eh? Yeah, well. You're on the camera. Yeah. What's up? Where are you? Hey man, where are we sitting? Just here. I took your place over there. Ah, I was sitting over here. Alright, good to see you. How are you?
Are you back?
That was good.